somehow Wolverine returned, and now we gotta talk about bad plots and good plots. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty, I'm the author of Entry Wounds, and welcome to my writing channel. Plot is one of the most critical storytelling elements. A good one can engage the audience with a sequence of meaningful events, while a bad one can suck the energy right out of a story. With that in mind, today we're gonna give plot the bad versus good treatment. We'll discuss what makes a good plot, then we'll look at 4 specific types of bad plots. And for each type, I'll give you a bad example from a story and explain why it sucks. Then I'll give you a good example and explain why that one works. Here's your spoiler warning for today. The ones in red contain the heaviest spoilers. First off, I want to point out that plot and story are not the same thing. A lot of people think the two are interchangeable, but plot is actually a part of the greater story, which includes other key elements like character, theme, world building, etc. In simplest terms, plot is the sequence of events that drives the story. Something happens, which causes something else to happen, which causes another thing to happen, and so on. Okay, so now that we've defined what plot is, now let's talk about what makes a plot good. I came up with 4 specific things. The first thing is events that are driven by choices and consequences, or cause and effect if you prefer. But choices and consequences, they push a plot forward and make it cohesive. Actions trigger reactions. And a plot shouldn't be driven by things like coincidences, random events, or convenient outcomes. Instead, it should involve meaningful cause and effect. Second thing that makes a plot good is balanced conflict. Conflict is a struggle between 2 opposing sides. It comes in several varieties: person versus nature, versus society, and versus the self. You can have multiple sources of conflict in a story, and the protagonist should have to struggle to resolve these conflicts. Remember, the greater the struggle, the more impressed we'll be when the hero actually achieves their goals. And it's important to keep the conflict balanced. If characters pursue realistic goals that test and develop their skills, that can grip the audience. For instance, Walter White doesn't become a meth kingpin overnight. It's a process that occurs over multiple seasons worth of events before he finally achieves power. Third thing that makes a plot good: escalating stakes. This means that as the plot progresses, the characters should have more to gain and more to lose. A good plot intensifies or expands the danger, whether that danger affects someone's personal values or the lives of many. And the fourth thing that makes a plot good is when it represents a character's internal journey. This means that plot should serve as an external representation of the story's themes or the character's internal struggles. This is important because the best stories involve characters who grow and change. And in order to show internal change, we need to show events that hammer home the transformation. For example, in Star Wars, Han Solo grows from a selfish mercenary to a selfless rebel, and the story events reflect this. Early on, all he cares about is protecting himself and making easy money. Later, he's willing to risk his life for money. Then, at the end, he's willing to risk his life for his friends. The plot events reflect his internal growth and allow us to enjoy his character arc. Alright, now let's get to the bad versus good. The way this works is that I'm going to give you 4 types of bad plots. I'll explain what each one is, then I'll give you a bad example to illustrate what I mean, and I'll explain why that one sucks. And then I'll give you a good example that does the job better, and I'll explain why that one works. The first type of bad plot is the idiot plot. This is a plot that's driven by characters who make stupid, illogical decisions. Conflict could easily be avoided or resolved altogether if characters used common sense or acted according to their established intelligence. Instead, idiotic choices create contrived events, and this type of plot may involve several coincidences. And the thing about idiot plots is that they can be forgivable in comedies. However, they're very frustrating in serious stories because idiot plots undermine the characters and the drama. For a bad example, let's look at Prometheus. Prometheus is the prequel to the Alien movies. Its characters are a level 99 kind of stupid, and they need to be in order to make this contrived, overcomplicated plot happen. As for the basic summary, this movie opens with 2 scientists discovering a cave painting that shows a map to a distant planet that is thought to be home to humanity's creators, known as the Engineers. Without obtaining any conclusive info about this planet, our heroes decide to venture out there. And that's brilliant move number 1, risking your future based on a cave painting. After landing on the distant planet, they and their crew discover a mysterious alien structure. Rather than using robots or technology to safely investigate, they decide to make brilliant move number 2, which is to explore the place themselves. They soon discover a decapitated head and take it back to the ship, while David, the suspicious android, collects some black slime. Later, David spikes a crew member's drink with the slime and does so right in front of him. The guy drinks it anyway, that's brilliant move number 3, and then he impregnates Shaw, the protagonist, so she can give birth to this squid thing that needs to exist for the plot to happen. Around this time, brilliant moves number 4 and 5 happen. First, the map expert gets lost, then the head biologist decides to pet a hostile space cobra that ends up killing him. Later, the crew revisits the structure and locates a sleeping engineer. David asks him about extending human life, and the engineer responds by decapitating David and killing an old man. We then learn that this entire structure is actually a horseshoe-shaped spaceship, and now the engineer intends to fly to Earth and destroy humanity. But hold on, the heroes crash their own ship into the giant horseshoe, knocking it from the sky. Then, in the final confrontation, Shaw gets chased by the engineer until she unleashes her squid baby on him. Finally, the movie ends with Shaw heading off to visit the engineer homeworld and seek greater answers. This one sucks because it's an all-out assault on common sense. The characters repeatedly drive the plot into a brick wall with their stupid, rash decisions. Most notably, you have these scientists acting like morons. They have all this advanced technology, yet they recklessly explore the structure, then the captain can't keep track of his crew, then the mapmaker gets lost, then the biologist touches a hostile cobra, and the list goes on. Another problem is that the conflict is often unnecessary and unnatural. The writers prioritize danger, spectacle, and death over logic and common sense, and characters do whatever is necessary to make this plot happen. Then you have these conveniently timed events. I mean, you have one scenario where a boyfriend drinks black slime, then he impregnates Shaw, who has abdominal surgery to remove a squid, and then the next day she's able to run away from a rolling ship. It's all just so ridiculous, and it leads to this contrived and overcomplicated origin story for the xenomorph. Alright, now let's see if we can restore some brain cells by looking at John Carpenter's The Thing. This is a much smarter horror movie. It's set on an Arctic research base, and the central plot involves a shape-shifting alien that mimics and kills people off one by one. The movie opens with a Norwegian helicopter hunting down a dog that enters an American research camp. Why are they hunting the dog? Well, we don't know just yet, but they lose their minds trying to kill it and ultimately get themselves killed. The whole scene leaves the Americans baffled, and their pilot R.J. McCready decides to investigate the Norwegian base to check for survivors. Among the charred ruins, he finds a mutated corpse, which he brings back to the research station for further study. Not the brightest idea in the world, but he'll make up for it later, don't worry. Anyway, the dog later transforms into a Lovecraftian nightmare and absorbs several other dogs before being torched to death. After running an autopsy, the team determines that this is an organism that can perfectly replicate other life forms and could potentially overtake humanity within 3 years. In other words, the stakes are raised. Later, the mutated corpse consumes and mimics a man, which makes everyone paranoid about who else may have been infected. From this point on, fear and paranoia spread until the next deadly encounter. After seeing the thing split into individual parts, McCready proposes taking a blood sample from each person and burning the blood with a heated wire. This clever test exposes the monster, and Mac torches it. But the nightmare isn't over. Shortly after, the camp's power generator gets destroyed, leaving the men without heat. Mac speculates that the thing intends to freeze until a rescue team arrives, and the survivors agree that the thing cannot be allowed to escape. At the end, they decide to blow up the station to kill the monster. This one works because you have intelligent characters driving the plot. They act like reasonable human beings, and when they do become terrified, paranoid, and sleep-deprived, the pressure they're under causes them to make mistakes. Those mistakes are completely understandable given the situation, and since they're smart characters, we want to see how they'll solve their newfound problems. And McCready especially makes a bunch of clever decisions. But best of all, he's not perfect. He makes mistakes and he gets people killed, and then he learns from those mistakes and makes adjustments. Another great thing about this plot is that the conflict is balanced as the men gradually come to understand their opponent and learn how to defeat it. And I have to point out that the stakes are repeatedly raised. What starts off as a strange miscommunication between Americans and Norwegians grows into a battle for personal survival, and later a battle for the fate of the planet. Second type of bad plot is the scatterbrained plot. This is one that fails to commit to a central plot. It tries to cram in too many events or plot lines for its own good. It lacks focus and balance as it recklessly jumps between plot lines, and it may lack a clear central villain. And all of this leads to pacing issues and other problems. For a bad example, let's look at The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And first off, let's read Wikipedia's basic description of this disaster. Here's what it says. In the film, Peter Parker tries to protect his girlfriend Gwen Stacy as he investigates his parents' death, while also dealing with the supervillain Electro, and the return of his best friend Harry Osborn, who is dying from a deadly genetic disease. Okay, that is one nightmare of an elevator pitch. And that's without even mentioning the Rhino plotline, Gwen's college admissions drama, or the Oscorp subplot where the vice president frames Harry and tries to take over as CEO. Simply put, there is just too much movie in this movie. Anyway, the plot kicks off with Spider-Man fighting crime, graduating high school, and breaking up with Gwen because of the promise he made to her father. And speaking of fathers, Norman Osborn appears for 5 minutes so he can die from a genetic illness that will soon affect his son Harry. Meanwhile, Jamie Foxx accidentally lands in a tank full of electric eels, and that turns him into Electro. He later wanders into Times Square and gets upset when Spider-Man doesn't recognize him, and the nearby screen stops showing his face. Then he decides to become a villain so the plot can plot. Around this time, Harry gets sick and figures out that somehow Spider-Man's blood can save him. However, Spidey refuses to give him blood, so Harry breaks into an Oscorp lab in order to inject himself with dangerous spider venom. This almost kills him, but luckily there's a special suit within crawling distance that can reverse the effects of a fatal venom injection and turn him into the Green Goblin. Oh, and I forgot to mention that during this time, Gwen Stacy is trying to get a scholarship to Oxford. Peter gets upset at the thought of losing her, and he gets so upset that he smashes his dad's calculator and finds magical subway tokens that lead him to his father's secret underground lab. Then there's this big revelation about how Norman Osborn was trying to create weaponized spiders, but Peter's dad used his own DNA when creating the spiders, so only someone with Parker blood can use them, which really overcomplicates Spider-Man's origin story and the story in general. Anyway, Gwen gets the scholarship, Peter agrees to go to England with her, then they work together to stop Electro, and once he explodes, Harry shows up as the Green Goblin, captures Gwen, takes her to a clock tower, and then he and Spidey have a showdown. The battle ends with Gwen's tragic death, which is actually an excellent and heartbreaking scene in a movie that just doesn't deserve it. And this one sucks because you have too many storylines, too many scenes, and too many supervillains. The plot has no time to breathe because so much is going on, and the writers essentially crammed a mini-series into a single movie. Everything feels rushed and overcomplicated, and there's a ton of focus on Electro when Harry is actually the main antagonist. And that's probably the biggest problem here. Electro gets the spotlight but feels tacked on because he doesn't drive the plot. A villain should take action and drive the plot, but instead we get this random guy who conveniently gets transformed into a supervillain and essentially becomes Harry's sidekick later on. And the plot line with Peter's parents is a waste. You could have easily cut this storyline and maybe devoted some time to the Osborns instead. And one last reason why this sucks is because the plot is often driven by coincidence instead of choice and consequences, especially in key moments. I already mentioned that Electro becomes Electro thanks to some random accident. Then you have Peter discovering his father's secret lab not because he cleverly figured it out, but because he conveniently smashes a calculator full of subway tokens. And then Harry survives the venom injection not because he takes a precaution and wears a special suit that can protect him, but because there happens to be a special suit nearby after he has a bad reaction. It's not that you can't have coincidences in a story here and there, but when they pile up during critical moments, it makes the plot look silly. For a good example, let's look at The Dark Knight. And here we have another superhero sequel. And just like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, The Dark Knight is a sequel that follows a familiar origin story, and it includes 3 supervillains, and its main antagonist is a villain who appeared in a previous movie. And yet, the plot here is much stronger. The Joker drives the conflict right from the start. He robs a bank, torments the mob, and terrorizes Gotham. Meanwhile, Batman is eliminating organized crime with help from Jim Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent. They have so much success that crime families turn to the Joker, who kills a judge and the police commissioner before going after Dent. In addition to all that, the Joker tries to neutralize Batman by threatening to kill someone each day until Batman reveals his identity. This prompts Harvey Dent to lie about being Batman in order to draw out the Joker. Harvey's scheme works, but he and his girlfriend Rachel are taken hostage in the process. Batman manages to save Dent, but Rachel dies in an explosion. Later, the Joker manipulates Dent into getting revenge on the people responsible for her death. Meanwhile, panic spreads across Gotham, and in an act of desperation, Batman invades everyone's privacy in order to locate and capture the Joker. But even then, the Joker is a step ahead, and he reveals that he corrupted Dent to undermine the city's efforts against organized crime. Batman confronts Two-Face, and in the process causes him to fall to his death. In the final scene, Batman takes the blame for Dent's murders in hopes of preserving the man's reputation, and the movie ends with the police hunting down the Dark Knight. And this works because the Joker drives the plot. There is absolutely no question who the central central villain is, and he's a clever character who manipulates everyone from the mob to Harvey Dent to Batman himself in order to create chaos. Another reason why this works is because Batman has clear, focused goals. Initially, he wants to stop organized crime, then when the Joker starts aiding the criminals, Batman has to stop the Joker. It's a simple goal, yet complexity arises as the Joker uses new methods to raise the stakes. And it's worth pointing out that the events in The Dark Knight consistently follow a pattern of punch and counterpunch, which not only keeps the story focused, but it also intensifies the meaning and emotional impact of those events. And finally, choices and consequences fuel the conflict. Early on, Batman and the police choose to demolish the mob, and the mob reacts by unleashing the Joker. Later, Harvey Dent becomes a secondary villain not because he randomly falls into a tank full of electric eels, but because the Joker manipulates him during a moment of weakness and compels him to choose to seek twisted justice. Third type of bad plot is the bare bones plot. This is a thin, undercooked plot that doesn't have much to offer. It's usually straightforward and predictable, and it misses opportunities to explore ideas, it may lack character development, and it often has filler segments to pad the story's runtime. For a bad example, let's look at Rocky IV. Now, if you follow this channel, you know that I love this movie to death. It's one of my all-time favorites, but even I have to admit that the plot is just 90 minutes of Looney Tunes. It opens with Rocky giving his brother-in-law a robot for his birthday, and afterwards Apollo Creed decides to come out of retirement and fight an upstart Russian steroid user named Ivan Drago. Rocky tells his best friend to stay retired, but Apollo insists on fighting in the name of patriotism and the warrior's spirit. This leads to a disastrous fight that ends with Apollo getting executed because Rocky refused to throw the damn towel, and after Apollo's funeral, a guilt-ridden Rocky decides that the only way to make things right is by flying out to Russia and defeating Drago in a boxing match. The movie then turns into a music video for the next 30 minutes while Rocky and Drago train and train and train and take steroids and train some more. Everything culminates in an epically epic 15-round fight that rages on until Rocky KOs Drago in the final round. After the match, Rocky gives a goofy speech, the Russian crowd goes bonkers, and the Cold War ends. This one sucks because you have a bare-bones plot that's stretched thin. Remember in high school when you had to write a 5-page essay for class, but you could only come up with 2 pages, and then you had to BS the rest? That's Rocky IV. And the plot here essentially dies with Apollo. There are no surprises or compelling developments afterward, just a series of training montages, a couple character moments, and the final battle. And the plot offers a shallow plan for Rocky to beat Drago. Now, in Rocky III, Rocky prepared for his opponent by learning defensive fighting skills. He learned something new. But here in Rocky IV, there's no real strategy, nothing new. All he does is just get stronger before the fight. And this ends up being a missed opportunity. And ultimately, this movie relies on the franchise's momentum. The movie only works because we care about the characters who were established in previous movies, and because Drago provides an immense challenge for Rocky. Now, for a good example, let's look at John Wick. Here we have another movie with a simple, mostly straightforward plot. It opens with John mourning the loss of his wife and receiving a puppy that can help him grieve. One day he takes the dog out in his Mustang, and a Russian mobster who looks exactly like Theon Greyjoy decides he wants the car. That night, John's house gets broken into, his car gets stolen, and his dog, well, you know. Afterward, John learns that the mobster is the son of his former employer, Vigo. John then comes out of retirement and seeks revenge. Behind the scenes, Vigo pays other assassins to kill John. One tries to cash in, while the other, a man named Marcus, proves loyal to John. Marcus saves John during a critical moment, and John completes his rampage by killing Theon. Just when it looks like John might find peace, Vigo kills Marcus and sets up the final showdown, where John slaughters the rest of the Russian mob and kills Vigo in a fistfight. The movie then ends with John adopting a new dog and moving on. This one works because the revenge plot is both emotional and logical. A retired assassin wants to grieve the loss of his wife, but mobsters interfere and they give him a reason to murder everybody. And much like Rocky IV, here we have another story where most of the actual plot happens in the first 30 minutes, and then there's tons of action, but the key difference here is that there are actual moments of plot progression that contribute to our understanding of the characters and the world building. And you have action sequences that are followed by meaningful events that change the direction of the plot. And ultimately, the plot develops into this greater revenge story where John destroys his past. He had hoped to find peace in retirement, and now he returns to what he does best in order to create a world where he can start over. Finally, the fourth type of bad plot is the soulless plot. This is when plot events lack substance, meaningful developments, and consequences. The stakes may feel artificial, and as a result, the events get repetitive and pacing issues become apparent. For an example, let's look at Deadpool and Wolverine. And look, I know that people don't watch this movie specifically for the plot. We watch it for the characters, the buddy dynamic, and the humor, but at the end of the day, a bad plot is still a bad plot. Anyway, this one revolves around Deadpool trying to save his timeline, and the movie opens with him working as a used car salesman who's struggling to find meaning in life. Then he gets abducted by the TVA, or the Time Variance Authority, which is basically an organization that oversees the multiverse. The guy in charge, Mr. Paradox, says that Deadpool's timeline is rotting away because of the death of its anchor being, who happens to be Wolverine. Mr. Paradox wants to finish destroying this timeline by using a device called the Time Ripper, but Deadpool opts to save this universe by replacing the dead Wolverine with a new one. After locating a washed-up Wolverine, Deadpool returns to Mr. Paradox only to learn that an anchor being can't be replaced. He then pisses off Mr. Paradox, who banishes him and Palpatine to this wasteland called the Void. The Void's overseer, Cassandra Nova, tries to kill them, but they team up with a resistance group consisting of Marvel cameos and eventually escape the Void. Cassandra follows them and decides to use the Time Ripper to destroy all timelines so that the only thing left is the Void. That's when Deadpool and Wolverine set out to stop her, but she unleashes an army of Deadpools to interfere. After the battle, our heroes learn that one of them must sacrifice their life to destroy the Time Ripper by disrupting its energy flow. Then, in a twist everyone saw coming, the duo destroys the machine together, both men survive, and the timeline is saved. This sucks because the plot is an uninspired excuse to bring back Wolverine. You have a multiverse plot that's just as annoying as the multiverse plots that it's making fun of. First of all, you have Mr. Paradox, you have this brain-dead villain who says that Deadpool can join the Avengers by letting everyone in his world die. Yeah, like that's gonna happen. And then there's all this exposition about the TVA and anchor beings, and it's all there to set up a plot that barrels toward the cliched and predictable save the multiverse outcome. Worse yet, there's nothing at stake during the movie's action scenes because the two main characters can regenerate when injured, and there are no meaningful side characters in immediate danger. The conflict ends up feeling repetitive, and pacing issues become more noticeable as the plot drags on. And yes, I'm well aware that the movie is a comedy, but it's still over 2 hours long, and the empty plot makes the minutes feel heavier than they should be. Now, for a better example of a multiverse plot that cashes in on Marvel nostalgia, let's look at Spider-Man No Way Home. This picks up after Mysterio reveals Spider-Man's identity to the entire world. Peter faces a surge of negative publicity, and his closest friends suffer by getting snubbed from attending MIT. Peter then asks Doctor Strange to cast a spell that'll make everyone forget he's Spider-Man. Strange agrees, but Peter tries to alter the spell, and it backfires by bringing classic Spidey villains into this universe. Strange insists on sending the villains back, but Peter recognizes that sending them back in their current condition would force them to meet a deadly fate. This motivates Peter to trap Strange and rehabilitate the villains. The strategy works on Dr. Octopus, but not on the Green Goblin, who causes havoc and kills Peter's Aunt May. Afterwards, Peter's friends try to locate him, and instead they bring 2 other Spider-Men into this universe. They then find Peter, who's now intent on sending the villains home to die, but Toby and Andrew compel him to regain his idealism and cure the villains. After curing 3 of the 4, Peter attempts to get revenge on the Goblin before Toby intervenes. Then Peter and Andrew cure the Goblin together and send him home. In the aftermath, Peter recognizes the consequences of tampering with the multiverse, and he asks Strange to erase him from everyone's memory. This works because the plot is built upon choices and consequences. It hammers home the classic theme of with great power comes great responsibility by showing how Peter's choices create and intensify his problems, and how taking responsibility is the solution. You also have meaningful, escalating stakes. Peter tries to help his friends, which draws villains into his universe, which prompts him to try and save everyone, which causes his aunt's death, and ultimately leads to a scenario where the Goblin threatens to bring even more enemies into this world. Another great thing here is that the nostalgic characters are more than just cameos. The multiverse concept here brings in villains and heroes who significantly and uniquely impact the plot. Finally, the plot is focused and grounded thanks to Peter's personal journey. The plot could have lost its mind and gone in a zillion different directions because it's a multiverse story, but from start to finish, Peter is trying to help everyone, whether it's his high school friends or villains from other universes. His willingness to overextend himself to help others no matter the cost is what unites the plot events and creates a meaningful whole. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is the worst or best plot that you've ever come across in a story? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he can't put it down till he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Check out my other videos. Maybe hit that thanks button for me. And as always, remember to keep on writing.